I was on the air with Jesse Lee Peterson the other day, and he reminded his audience that on this channel, on this podcast, and in my books, I do more of this, and I may be the only one doing it the way I'm doing it, more of these stories of black-on-white violence, black-on-white hostility, black-on-white criminality, wildly out of proportion, not just black-on-white, black-on-gay, black-on-young, black-on-old, black-on-straight, black-on-Asian, black-on-Amish, black-on-Eskimos, black-on-kitties, puppies, and turtles. And so Jesse wanted to know how I didn't get angry at this. Because he watches the stuff here and he sees we try to stay, kind of keep it on an even keel. The answer is I practice detachment, but I wonder if that's entirely true. Because there are a lot of stories here we don't even do. You think about it. Have you ever seen stories on this channel of black child abuse on infants? There's tons of them out there. I'm thinking in the last couple weeks, stories of black people putting kids in ovens, breaking breaking children's backs, beating, and always involving boyfriends. Tons of those. Black child abuse is wildly out of proportion, just like every other kind of black criminality, without exception. We also don't do much on black criminality and black violence directed at animals. Setting a cat on fire, beating a dog to death, throwing a dog into a busy freeway, that kind of stuff. So that's one way we kind of practice detachment around here. And that's one way I can do these without getting all, yelling at people all the time. I mean, that's not really an effective way to communicate what's going on here. This relentless quality of relentless black on white hostility, a precursor to black on white violence. If I thought going out and shouting about it would work, well, I would do that. But even so, every once in a while, I get a little bit annoyed. Not necessarily at the videos. I get annoyed at myself. I get annoyed at you. I get annoyed because we're about to see a story I think could have been easily avoided had somebody that listens to this podcast, a lot of people do, somebody who watches my videos or reads my books, had just seen this mom, seen what she was going through and said, listen, you can't send your white kid to a black school. That's not workable. Your kid is going to be the target of relentless black hostility and violence and abuse. That is a plain fact that we've talked about here many, many, many times. We've documented that. Sometimes with ridiculously horrific consequences like suicide. And so let's keep that in mind as we watch this video of this mom who, for some reason, decided she could send her child to a black school, 90% black, and her son was just going to go in there and sing Kumbaya. Where did she get the idea that would be okay? How did she get that idea? I don't want to make this sound too easy. I know people have these life circumstances maybe that don't let them give their children the attention and the time and the upbringing they deserve. I mean, that's a fact of life in every divorced household in this country. Every household where there's a single mom in this country. But even so, there is simply no excuse to put your child in danger every day. There's no excuse to turn your child over to a school system that's going to look at this ridiculous level of black on white violence, then send him to therapy to try to convince him that it's all just words and they cannot hurt him. And the best way to fight back is just to ignore them. Let's see how far that kind of advice got this kid.
3 investigates a case of bullying at a Shreveport elementary school. A 5th grader attempts to hang himself while in class and while it was in session. But his mother doesn't think enough was done to help her young son. Our Sean Gables joins us live in studio this morning. Sean, understandably, this mom wants some answers.
Nate, the mom, she wants answers, but the school isn't telling her much. But she kept a paper trail of documents which say her son was repeatedly taunted and hit by classmates at Southern Hills Elementary.
It was mostly the same kids.
11-year-old Richard Coker says what began as name-calling
It happened almost every day.
jokes about his weight, his mother, their apartment housing, grew quickly to physical abuse.
I was scared to go to class.
For 4 months inside Richard's 5th grade class at Southern Hills Elementary, his mother, Miranda, says 5 of his classmates made him a target.
We've dealt with bullying before, nothing to the extreme of this.
Miranda provided 3 investigates with documents revealing how one of Richard's bullies was arrested and eventually kicked out for repeatedly punching Richard in the face, resulting in a trip to the hospital.
He was told the reason why he gets picked on is because he's a white kid in a primarily black school.
School administrators separated the students, but they remained in the same classroom, something Miranda initially approved. But a bullying report filed by the mother dated December 4th shows Richard's classmate kicked a soccer ball in his face. Others called him fat, stupid, ugly, in class, on the playground, in the cafeteria. Documents show the bullies ripped up Richard's classwork. Miranda said it happened under a series of substitute teachers.
So we're always dealing with subs that don't know what they're doing, don't know what to look for, don't know the signs of anything. It's just a volunteer stuck in a classroom to monitor kids.
By January 12th, the 11-year-old who had been admitted to a behavioral health clinic before the school year started reached a breaking point.
My son tied the jacket strings around his neck and tried to hang himself in the middle of his classroom.
Documents show Richard attempted to take his own life while class was in session with a substitute teaching class.
The teacher didn't address it until she got tired of getting bugged by other kids. Because I was trying to hang myself.
Richard claims the school's counselor showed no sense of urgency either. Instead, his classmate escorted him to the office with 0 adult supervision.
The counselor didn't even come. She just told her, and the counselor said to bring me to her.
Richard's mom demanded answers from administrators, but was almost arrested by a campus reserve officer for causing a disturbance.
As bad as things are, you try to call, you try to get help from school board, school officials. It's the same thing, but as soon as you show any type of anger, they don't want to talk to you anymore. It's like you're not allowed to be mad that we're not doing our job, and now your son's life is in the balance over it.
Documents show school officials recommended Richard go to a psychiatric hospital. He admits after treatment, he feels better.
The thing that was going through my mind mostly was, I don't belong. But now I know that I do.
Mom says she's unsure if he'll ever go back to Southern Hills Elementary.
My son is very smart. My son is very bright. He's terrified to go to school.
If and when he does, Richard says he'll handle intimidation much better and offers this advice for anyone else experiencing the same.
I tell him to not worry about the bullies, to worry about your education, because those are just words, and that's what I figured out. Words are just words. If you let them hurt you, they'll hurt you.
It is very important to note that complaints filed in Cattle Parish schools are considered confidential, and the school is not allowed to share details. But district spokeswoman Mary Nash Wood provided the statement after me approaching them multiple times, saying Caddo Parish Public Schools take any charge of bullying seriously and investigates each allegation thoroughly. She also stated that parents not happy with an investigation can appeal the results at the district level, a process that would allow for schools to move students should both parents and administrators agree. We're going to continue our team coverage on this story. Andrea Finney joins us in the newsroom, and you've been digging up information showing a very strong link between bullying and suicide.
That's right, Sean. Although some see bullying as just part of being a kid, statistics show there is a strong connection between bullying and suicide. Take a look. According to the Centers for Disease Control, suicide is the third leading cause of death among young people, resulting in about 4,400 deaths per year. For every suicide among young people, there are at least 100 suicide attempts. Over 14% of high school students have considered suicide, and almost 7% have attempted it. Bully victims are between 2 to 9 times more likely to consider suicide than non-victims. And a recent study found that at least half of suicides among young people are related to bullying, with 10 to 14-year-old girls at an even higher risk for suicide. ABC News even reports 160,000 kids stay home from school every day because of fear of bullying. Now, we also checked Caddo Parish School's official website. It has an entire page dedicated to erasing bullying. The district claims no forms of bullying shall be permitted or condoned by the Caddo Parish School Board, and actually defines bullying as a pattern of one or more of the following: gestures including the use of silly faces, taunting, malicious teasing, or spreading untrue rumors is considered bullying. More obvious patterns of bullying includes physical acts not limited to hitting, kicking, pushing, tripping, choking, damaging personal property or unauthorized use of personal property, and repeated and purposefully shunning or exclusion from activities. The district claims when this pattern of behavior is exhibited toward a student more than once, perpetrators could face potential criminal consequences, and for older students, possible loss of driver's license. Now, interestingly, in respect to bullying, Caddo Parish does have a program that provides a minimum of 4 hours of training for new employees who have contact with students and 2 hours of annual training for all school employees. The training is supposed to include how to recognize the behaviors of bullying, how to identify students that are bullied, and how to use appropriate intervention and information on suicide prevention and the relationship between suicide risk factors and bullying. But if school authorities don't help with an ongoing bullying problem, local police or attorneys may be able to assist. And remember, if you are thinking about suicide or you need someone to talk to, there are free suicide hotlines. Nate, they simply have to call 1-800-273-TALK or 800-273-8255.
Suicide, never the answer. Andrea, some good information there. Thanks a lot.
And for Caddo Parish Schools' complete statement on bullying, or even we tried to find out if they had a training for the substitute teachers, because that was apparently part of what the mother's opinion was, is that because there was such an influx of substitutes that they were unaware of how to.
You know, we really don't do hypotheticals around here, right? Because we have just too many facts and hypotheticals are too weak. So we're not really going to sit here and say, well, Colin, if that were a black child in a white school and that happened to him, there would be a national story about it. No, we've already done those stories. That's not a hypothetical. We've done lots and lots of stories, many of which turn out to be hoaxes of black people in so-called white schools that get subject to such ridiculous racial abuse as somebody puts a banana on their door, or somebody puts some shoestrings in the hallway and the shoestrings look like a noose. And we know what happens. We know there are hundreds and hundreds of black people out there with signs and megaphones and school officials and school principals and school presidents promising everybody, even though they just found out it was a hoax, well, we're not going to let that happen on our watch. Oh no, this will be preparation for when it really does happen. And yet we get these stories one after another of white kids, black schools, suffering ridiculous levels of harassment and violence and abuse. And the only solution is to send that kid to a psychiatric hospital to gaslight him, to make him see somehow that it's somehow his fault. When it comes to child abuse, we cannot let anybody off the hook, including the mom. So the mom was very quick to deflect blame over to the substitute teachers. Well, why are there substitute teachers? Substitute teachers because teachers don't like teaching in black schools. They're too violent, too much chaos, too much dysfunction. Teachers aren't really teaching. They're just doing the best they can to keep everybody in school between the hours of 8 and 3, so at least the cops will be happy. Oh, you know who loves, keeping kids in school are the cops. That's like, okay, we know the black people are in school, so they won't be out on the street committing crime. Whew. And so now the mom is trying to blame this whole thing on substitute teachers and other teachers who don't have training in bullying. Good Lord, the teachers are victims of the same kind of violence. How many stories have we done where teachers have been the victims of this black violence in classrooms? How many? Here's one more out of Ohio. This guy was just in the news a few weeks ago. He was body slammed by a student. We did that story. Now he's back in the news where a student punches him in the face. And now we learn that he's been attacked by students 4 or 5 times over the life of his teaching career in the last, say, 10 years. And almost every time he gets attacked, they send him to a class on how to deal with crisis behavior. Black people attacking teachers is the teacher's fault. We've done lots. Don't make the black kids angry. There's lots of stories in there about teachers doing the exact same thing happened. The teachers go to the school, they go to the principal, and the principal says, you can't control your class. Sorry, we're not going to renew your contract. You being attacked by black people is your fault. I've done a bunch of stories where teachers actually sue and have won a lot of money because of the abuse that was inflicted upon them in the class, and because of there are some people that go beyond denial, deceit, and delusion. There are some principals that are actually complicit with this because they don't want white teachers in their schools. Yeah, that's in Don't Make the Black Kids Angry too. Thinking of a story where a black principal tells a white teacher, I don't want you doing any more damage to my black babies. I mean, everybody knows that the only reason black schools are in such credible levels of dysfunction, criminality, dysfunction, whatever other words we're using this month to kind of mask over exactly what's happening in these schools. Everybody knows the only reason that's happening is because of white people and white racism who don't know anything about black people, so they can't teach them. And that's pretty much it.
An Akron school teacher seen here in this video being body slammed by a student says he was attacked again by a different student at East High. And this time, Keith Rawling filed a police report after he was punched in the face.
Now, this latest incident comes at a time when the district is facing heat from teachers over student discipline. Bob Jones at the Akron School Board right now. You found other incidents between Rawling and the students there.
Well, Tanita, we found 4 incidents with students dating back to 2010, and in 2 of the cases, he was required to take some training classes. Rawling insists tonight he's doing nothing wrong in the classroom and says the big problem he's facing is students becoming more aggressive. February 6th, East High School. English teacher Keith Rawling heard a loud commotion and went to the classroom next door to help.
In the room, there was a young man, very aggressive, screaming, cussing at 2 students.
Rawling intervened, told a 15-year-old student to go to the principal's office. But in the hallway, the teen threatened and then chest bumped the teacher.
It got to the point where I had to push him away from me for my safety. Push him away from me. At that time, he punched me in the face.
The student was arrested for assault and menacing, the same charges another student faces for this caught-on-camera moment in Rawling's classroom last November. A student body slammed Rawling moments after he broke up a fight.
And I'm just trying to highlight the fact that It's really not a small thing. It's a big issue.
Rawling is among 22 teachers who have filed grievances arguing the district is violating the contract by not expelling or reassigning some students who assault teachers. On Monday, teachers rallied over this issue. We found Rawling had other incidents with students. In 2010, he agreed to training after the State Board of Education said he used inappropriate discipline techniques while teaching at Bookdale. Rawling says that's because he took a girl's cell phone away after she refused to put it away, and then she attacked him.
But jumped on my back and had me in a headlock. And from there, we wrestled around.
In 2011, the teacher struggled with another East student. Rawling says that happened after the student tried to slam his head on a desk. The student transferred to another school. Rawling was required to take crisis training.
I believe my actions always have been in the right, and I'm going to attempt to continue to keep them that way.
And tonight, the school district is not commenting on the student who punched Rawling, saying student information is private and protected by federal law.
I mean, that's the story of Dr. Glenn Singleton. He's the guy who wrote Courageous Conversations. He's the guy who makes $1 gajillion a year going around the country, teaching hundreds and hundreds of school districts, the teachers in these districts, mostly the white teachers, since most teachers are white, going to the white teachers saying, we have to have a courageous conversation about race. And the person thinks, oh, conversation, yeah, I'm down with that. I've been kind of wanting to talk to somebody about this whole racial thing at my school. I have some questions, and maybe this guy can help. That's how a lot of teachers walk into these seminars. That lasts about 2 minutes, because the first thing you learn in these seminars, and the reason they're called Courageous Conversations, is you, white teacher, have to be courageous enough to admit that your white racism is what's causing all this ridiculous level of black criminality and black violence and black academic underperformance in schools. There goes the conversation. The rest of it's a monologue from them to you. I've gotten a lot of letters from people, and there's a lot of info on the internet about this. Again, I covered this in a lot of detail, and don't make the black kids angry. But there's a lot of stuff out there where the white teachers will sit there in class, and the black teachers, there's usually like 20, 25 white teachers, 3 or 4 black teachers are all sitting together. And when Dr. Glenn Singleton, or whoever his accomplices are, they're sitting up at the front talking about white racism. The black teachers are going, oh yeah, preach on, brother, preach on. They're laughing. They're clapping, they're encouraging. And if the white teacher stands in the back and raises his hand and goes, hey, Dr. Singleton, I've been a teacher for, a good number of years, and, I really don't think I'm a racist. Lots and lots of teachers have learned the hard way that if you stand up and say that, if you don't want to have the courageous conversation, if you're not brave enough to have the courageous conversation, then you can't teach in that school. The technical term is you won't get your contract renewed. Some of the teachers' unions are good on fighting that. Others are just absolutely complicit in establishing this system of institutional black hostility directed at white teachers. Every time we come up on this topic of black violence against teachers, all these things run through my mind, all these numerous stories in Milwaukee, Green Bay, St. Louis, Baltimore, all stories we've done, over Philadelphia, on and on and on and on. But I'm trying to keep these videos manageable, right? I'm trying to keep these podcasts manageable, so I can't make every one 6 hours long. But, I post a lot of these things. My new videos are being posted at minds.com/Colin Flaherty. If you want to see my old ones, a good place to see my old videos is Facebook. It's facebook.com/WGBleedAlot. WGBleedAlot. Just hit the little video tab. You'll see a search box. Put in teachers in there. See what happens. See how many times we've documented this black on teacher violence. A bunch. See how many times we've documented the white kids attacking teachers. 0. See what happens if a black kid comes home from school and says, "Mommy, the white people are they're picking on me. They said they like my hair. They said they want to touch my hair. They said I talk nice. They're being really mean to me, Mommy." I mean, that's the definition of how white people are mean to black people, right? We learned that the other night when the black women who went to Costa Rica because they're sick of white people and they want to get away from them. It's like, okay, please tell me the worst thing white people are doing to you. One of them said I talk nice. Okay, anything else? Yeah, one of them was talking about my hair. Wow. Do we see anything like this, what that kid went through? Do we see anything like what that teacher went through in Akron? Akron. No. But when we see 1/10 of that, remember, not if we see, when we see 1/10 of something like that, we can't get enough teachers, we can't get enough school board members, we can't get enough community activists out there rallying against all the white people doing all these bad things to black people, which often turns out to be a fairy tale. Doesn't matter though, does it? There are so many stories of white kids being attacked in black schools. So many white kids that get bused into a black school. I did an interview with 2 kids like that, and I was saving it for this month, for Black History Month, because if you ask any white kid that went to school in a black school, first of all, it's so damaging. Most kids don't get out, they don't graduate because it's too violent. And most kids who do stay in there, they don't really get a full education because black schools aren't really about education. They're really about behavior modification, all these crazy behavior modification plans that never work. I mean, there are 16 high schools in Baltimore where nobody can read or write. Nobody. The technical term they use is 3rd grade. But think about what a 3rd grade public school reading level is. Think about what that means. Do you think they're down there reading Shakespeare? Do you think they're down there deriving quadratic equations in math? No. 3rd grade in a public school is basically kindergarten for the rest of the world. 16. Tucker Carlson had a school superintendent, was it Albany, New York, on a show the other night, and she was all down with the cause of DACA and how we need, we got to give these kids amnesty and we got to give them all sorts of free stuff in order to keep them here, or else Western civilization will collapse. And Tucker said, "Hey, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but how come you have so many schools in your district where nobody can read or write?" I mean, what's up with that? Lady wasn't ready for that question whatsoever. Anyway, let's get to these 2 interviews, and they're over the phone, so the audio quality might not be as crystal clear as this, but the information in there is really, really important. These are two reports right from the front, right what happens to kids that go to these schools. These 2 guys kind of made it out of those schools. They're kind of the exception. I know about 20 kids. We were growing up. There's a lot of kids in our neighborhood. A lot of kids. Half of us went to the Catholic high school. The other half went to the public high school, P.S. DuPont. That kind of went from black to white, white to black overnight. Of the 20 kids that went there, probably 17 of them today are leading a life in this twilight of petty crime, drug use, alcoholism, can't hold a job. I mean, they're just a mess. A couple of them got out and are doing well, but it's almost in spite of what happened at that school. Anyway, let's listen to these guys, and I'll see you on the other side. What does Black History Month mean to you?
To me, well, what does Black History Month mean to me? I mean, it depends. You know, back in high school, it was the scariest time of year for me, and a lot of kids in my school. You know, it was a time of year where you knew, being white, that you were gonna have a hard time. I mean, back when I was in high school, every year, you know, when February started, the teachers would start going over, of course, Black history, and but they would focus in on certain things, you know. So it was the more fringe things. I mean, they would talk a lot about, for example, Malcolm X, and they had no problem expressing his violent beliefs, you know, to the class, or talking about more recent things like Rodney King. You know, of course, back then it was before the Michael Browns and whatnot. So with the Rodney King case, let's put it this way. I did not even know that the cops had been brought to court, judging by what they said, because it pretty much started with he got beat by police and ended with he almost died when he got beat by police. There was no background to it. There was no, you know, he got pulled over. He was on drugs. He was a criminal. There was the police got brought up on charges. It was just the police never got convicted, never got in trouble.
Okay.
And
why don't you describe what it was like for a white person to be a student in a predominantly black school, day to day, what it was like?
Absolutely. So it was. Do you mind if I say the school name?
No, go ahead if you want.
So, you know, the school, South High School in Worcester, Massachusetts, it was essentially pure hell to be, you know, in the school. Day to day, if you had books in your hands, you know, I described the first day that I was in that school, I was walking down the hallway, and 5 kids slammed the books out of my hand and said, you know, fucking white pussy, pick that up. And, you know, I picked up the books. I mean, it's not, you had to adapt. And so for some people it was worse than others, but essentially if you were there to learn and you were white, then you were in trouble. And what I mean by that is, you know, black kids in the school resented anybody that wanted to be successful. And they blamed, you know, the white kids for their troubles. So, you know, I mean, I don't want to try to speculate where it came from, but from what it seemed to me, you know, they were less interested in learning a lot of the times and more interested in taking away education from other people.
Okay, so let's talk about day to day. Well, let's talk about Black History Month. What was the relationship between what these kids heard in the classroom where you were and anything that happened outside of the classroom?
Sure. So Black History Month essentially was a time in the school where black kids would feel entitled to take and to hurt other people. So
hold on. Taking white people, black people, how'd they focus that?
So when Black History Month, every year in Black History Month in the school, when they were taught in class about you know, black history, and it was always about the violence, like I said, always about the violence. They took it almost as a free pass to hurt the white kids and the Asian kids, specifically the white kids and the Asian kids, and to take away from their education. So things would happen like a lot of violence, fights. Give
me some examples.
Okay, so for example, I mean, specifically me with my own eyes, I told the story. But I was in gym class, and I was never really good at sports. And you know, that day we were playing, I believe it was basketball that day. I was always bad at everything, and I wasn't doing very good. But it was just gym class, you know. Somebody picked a fight with me, and they pushed me down on the court.
Was that the first time anybody had ever pushed you down or picked a fight with you?
No, definitely. That was the first time I fought back.
So how many times had this happened before?
5 or 6 at least, just to me.
Okay.
It happened 5 or 6 times just to me, where I'd be, you know, in an altercation in school.
Over what period of time?
A year or so, a little bit less than a year, 10 months in the school. 10 months in the school. And, you know, this particular time I finally fought back, and I get suspended for it. Every single time a teacher had caught the person that had physically assaulted me, every single time. And even though that had happened, like I said, numerous times, at least a handful of times, I still got in trouble for defending myself.
Okay, now what about the Asian kids? Were they targets too?
The Asian kids were probably targeted more than the white kids.
When we say targeted, are we talking about what form did it take? Harassment, taunting, physical violence, and how did they react?
So it started with harassment. Racial harassment was big. Making fun of the Asian kids. Back then, they used to call them gooks. They used to call them chinks a lot. Most of them weren't Chinese, but they'd still call them chinks and gooks a lot. And they would make fun of them, do mock accents and whatnot. It was a big thing to do the mock accents. They wanted to, and I know it sounds very cliche, but they wanted to copy off them. They would make them do their homework. I, for a short while, lived with a Laotian family, and that kid, Seng was his name. He was, constantly asked to do homework for the black kids, and they taunted him. It got violent too. As a matter of fact, it got so violent that one day a group of Asian kids decided to fight back, and there was like a stabbing. It was a couple big fights, and the Asian population was so small that they got it every day.
Now, day to day, for a white person or an Asian person in this predominantly black school, how big of a deal was your personal safety, and how big of a deal was the violence?
Let's put it this way: the first 2 years in that school, I didn't feel comfortable at all, any day. You were definitely threatened with violence on a daily basis, and you almost had to keep your head down. I only gained confidence when I became friends with a group of people that would protect me. But for most kids, looking back, all you could do is keep your head down and hope you did not create any attention.
What was the reaction from the teachers, black and white?
Black and to be quite frank, it was about the same, and they didn't want. You could tell they didn't want to do anything, and it would take a lot for them to do anything. You report them. We'd go to the principal's office. No one would really get suspended. No one would get in trouble. People could say what they wanted. I could tell you, I've probably been called at that school. I probably got called, white boy or cracker 1,000 times in front of teachers. The Asian kids would be called chinks and gooks in front of the teachers, and all kinds of racial slurs would be thrown out there. But God forbid, the minute anybody else said anything about black people, you'd be suspended right away, if not expelled. It happened numerous occasions. The teachers, were harassed, honestly, by some of the students too, though. Specifically during Black History Month. It was dangerous for them too.
Do you ever meet kids that you went to? So of all the kids you knew in that high school, did any of them ever have to leave because the violence directed, the racial violence, the black and white violence directed at them was so intense they had to drop out?
Yes, of course. The racial violence definitely attributed to people dropping out of school or transferring schools.
So maybe of the 20 kids that you might know in this school when you first got there, how many of these white or Asian kids had to not just transfer but drop out?
Drop out. I'd say about close to half of them. Probably 40% of them had to, drop out.
Now, the ones who dropped out, did they ever really get their life back on track?
No, most of them have turned to drugs. And I specifically remember, one case where it was this kid that got picked on a daily basis. It got to the point where this kid was so depressed. He had gained, from when I knew him, it was about a year period, he had gained 50, 60 pounds. He got very overweight. He was picked on a daily basis. And he was made fun of so much that he ended up carving a swastika into himself and getting expelled. No one ever questioned whether or not there was a reason behind this kid. And even though he complained numerous times, no one ever questioned whether or not there was a reason behind that. That stuff doesn't just happen. Kids don't just, young kids don't just carve swastikas into them. He was picked on and harassed for a year.
When we say picked on, that almost makes it almost minimizes it, doesn't it? I mean, they're not really picking on. I mean, there's some really nasty things going on.
It was terrorism. I mean, there was no less than terrorism than what you see on the TV today, happening to like Christians overseas, for example. There was no difference in that from terrorism.
Now, what about his parents, or what about your parents, and what did they know and what did they think about this?
Well, my parents weren't very active in my life, so it's probably a bad example. I can tell you that the reaction from the other kids' parents. For my mom, it was denial. My mother was still active in my life for a little bit, and it was denial. I mean, she did not want to believe that it had anything to do with race or anything like that.
Like Howard Stern's mom used to send Howard Stern to a school like this for 1 year, and he says his mom said, "You are going to be my ambassador to this school, and you're going to spread love and goodness among all the black people there, and they're going to love you." But he went through the same thing you're describing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wonder how that worked. It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, it was, like I said, it was hell. It definitely pushed me towards, a negative thought. I mean, it's not.
What about the kid with who was expelled for carving and mutilating? I mean, when you say he put a Nazi thing in his face, what I hear is he was self-mutilating. Anything do you know about his parents? What they thought about it?
I don't. I really don't know his parents too well at all.
When you and your buddies get back together, and I know you talk to a lot of them, has anybody ever said, "Hey, whatever happened to that kid who carved that thing into his head," or wherever he carved it?
Yeah, I mean, it's come up. Nobody knows really. I mean, it was a bizarre situation, and after probably a month of it happened, after he got kicked out of school. I know that after that he went to a alternative school, which was even more heavily black. And I know that things weren't going well there, and his family moved him out of the state. I don't know where, but his family moved him out of the state, and I lost contact then. I know that he said that they were going to Maine, and then I don't know what happened after that.
Have you ever seen or heard an accurate depiction of what it was like for a white kid to be in a predominantly black school?
Can you repeat? Like,
have you ever seen a movie or a TV show where they talked about how what life was like for a white kid in a black school?
No, I mean, if you take like the movie A Bronx Tale and you reverse the races, and that would be reality. But no, there's never any clear or real depiction at all. I've never seen one, anyways.
Now, this isn't the only school in America where this happened, and there was a lot of busing going on. Mm-hmm. If you take out an envelope and you start writing a few numbers on the back of the envelope, how many schools there were, how many kids are tortured, harassed, taunted, how many are subject to assault daily, that over a period of years across the country, that number gets very, very large. It gets over 100,000 in a hurry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, it's, I look at my school and the schools in the district, and I can imagine if you take, I mean, in our districts probably weren't the worst. I mean, I can only imagine what goes on in places like, well, we know what goes on in places like Philadelphia. I mean, we hear the stories, but, I can guarantee you one thing, my school is not even close to the worst. It probably wasn't even on the list of the top 50, and it was real bad. So, I mean, I can only imagine what goes on in other schools. I mean, you see the stories out there that 13-year-old kid followed home from school by two 18-year-old black kids, lit on fire on his front porch. Stuff like that didn't happen at my school, so I can only imagine.
Okay. Sum up the Black History Month thing. When during Black History Month, was there an uptick in understanding among the races, or did this really kind of antagonize the races?
Black History Month, all throughout high school, definitely antagonized, both races. The things that they would go over, the things that they would discuss, the way that they would treat Black History Month, it was, I've never seen anything like it before in my life. And, unfortunately, we're starting to see it more now. I would say that, it definitely agitated things beyond the point of repair. It created hate, a lot of hate in both races, and it was definitely not fair. It was 100% biased. And you would think that by watching the teachers talking about in the high schools talking about Black History Month that slavery ended 5 years ago.
Now you have two. I know you have children. When you think about sending them to a school, would you ever send them to a school that was 30, 40, 50% black?
In the district that I live in now, the answer is no, I would never. I'd rather pay $20,000 a year to send each of them to school than send them to a school with that racial makeup. And unfortunately, the district that I'm in now, I'm going to have to move out of, buy a new house and sell my house before they get into school age, public school age, because I'm afraid that I won't be able to afford a good Catholic school or a Christian school, and I can't send them to the Coatesville district schools. It's worse there than it ever was at my school.
So
you were a white kid, went to a black school. Did you ever experience any violence there?
Yes, I experienced a lot of violence. I mean, there was a constant intimidation. There was fighting in the hallways. It was like I said, it was a time when gangster rap had just came out. It was a time where most of the black kids, they all wore like a leather necklace that had like an African symbol with the African colors. And they were, always fighting, intimidating in the hallways.
So what was it like? What was it like for you to just walk down the hallway with you? What was it like for you or your friends?
It was rough walking down the hallways. The school was so packed. It would come to a complete stop within the hallways. There were so many people, and they would. I just had trouble because I was I wasn't into hip hop. I was just like a normal average white kid, and I just ran into.
So would people say anything to you in the hallways as a matter of course?
Yes, I mean, I was approached many times. Just they had belt buckles wrapped around their hands, and they were beat my ass for like I didn't even know the reason. You know what I mean? This was new to me.
What would they say?
In your face, what's up, white boy, and you want to, basically they were going to kick my ass at 3 o'clock. It was almost like 3 o'clock high or something. It was it was just a big change at that time where you saw like a lot of it was just like a different mentality going on then. You know what I mean? It was, and now of course, you know what I mean? There's constant threats, being pushed up against the wall, taking your lunch money, whatever it was, taking your lunch from you. I mean, it was, it was a nightmare, I had a total horrible experience at my
were the teachers or the administration, were they aware of any of this?
I think they were aware, but I think they were intimidated as well. I mean, they weren't gonna, they would keep on, trying to teach while all this stuff was going on. You know what I mean? I mean, I was being surrounded at my desk by, there'd be like 3 or 4 blacks. I'm getting surrounded in basically, what they call being punked. And while, the teacher's still writing on the board, he doesn't, he didn't care. You know what I mean? If it got too disruptive, he would say something.
What is being punked?
Just like, stand up, in your face, like, get up, I dare you to get up, put your head down, make me put my head down on my desk, just stupid things like that, it didn't even make any sense to make me put my head down, just constant intimidation, you know what I mean, for no reason at all.
And so the teachers and the administrators, they kind of looked the other way.
They definitely looked the other way. It was a lot of students, and you were a number, and they didn't care one bit. They didn't.
How many kids were in your school?
God, I don't know. I want to say 1,500 to 2,000.
Yeah, you know what? I actually know your school, and it's about anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000.
That's correct. Yeah.
So it was probably what, 50-60% black then?
Easy 60% black or more. You know, the football team was all, you know, they were all black. The gym room was all black. Anything to do with that, you know, was ruled by black. The hallways, the stairways were ruled by black. So, you know, you learn quickly where to go, where not to be. You know, I was beat up in the bathroom one time because one of them wanted to pick me up and put me in the trash can, and like, you know, I fought back a little bit, got in a fight. You know, it was stuff like that. That was Colin. That was
when that one person was trying to put you in the trash can. What were other people surrounding him doing?
Watching. They were watching, and then as soon as I started fighting back, they would get into it too. So we had like 3 against 1. You know, I swung on him. You know what I mean? You know, I'm trying to defend myself. You know, I get kicked. You know, and beat down, and that stuff would go on. It was routinely. It was, you know, every other week until I think it was like I said, until I finally got beat up in the gym by a bunch, like at least 10 people. And that's when I quit school. After that day, I got beat up.
What grade were you in?
I was in 10th grade. In 10th grade when I got for my last beating. I was in 10th grade, and you know, I got beat up in the gym, and I walked out of school and never went back. And I told my parents that I'm not gonna succumb to that. You know, I'm not going to school and getting beat up, and you know.
What did your parents think about that school and the environment you were in?
I don't think they realized the environment that I was in. I think they were in the mindset that high school was like high school when they went to school. That's what I truly believed. I don't think they thought, oh, it was maybe just a little scuffle or something like that. You couldn't explain what was going on to them at that time. You know what I mean? They just figured it was, you know, boys roughhousing or something to that effect. You know what I mean? I don't think they quite understood what was happening. You know, maybe today I could explain as now that I'm older, and maybe they would, you know, comprehend. But back then, they didn't want to hear it.
Were you the only kid? So you had in your group of friends 15 to 20 people that you grew up with and all went to the same school. Were you the only one to quit school because of this intense black on white hostility and violence?
No, we had 15 to 20 people in our group, and a lot of us, I'd say out of that 20, I'd say at least half of us quit school and never returned. And after that, it was just, you know, we weren't going to go back and get beat up, and we weren't going to go back and having people jump in your face and talk, you know, that it was just, we weren't going to do it. We were just like, we were sick of it. So no, dropped out. And then from then I saw, you know, just like when I stepped back after a few years, just seeing everyone kind of in a downward spiral, you know.
Now, let me ask you this. Getting into, so all those kids that dropped out, you knew there was 10 of you. How many of those other 10 got their life on track?
I'd say total out of 20, I'd say 5 got their lives on track, and I know them to this day. And we talk about just recently we've talked about, you know, how we grew up and what we went through, and it's we reminisce on a sad point in our lives, and like we can look back and laugh as far as like the memories of our friends. But some of them, you know, things they did or, you know, stuff like that, but they're dead. You know what I mean? Like I have some of those friends are either, you know, strung out on drugs or they died from overdose of drugs.
So a lot of the people who dropped out they didn't like I happen to know your life's back on track. You have a successful career, and we'll leave it at that. But a lot of people, they just spent the rest of their life in this gray zone of petty crime, drug use, drifting, listless, depressed. which all began, which all started, which all kicked off with this black on white racial hostility in their high school.
That's correct. That's correct. It started, as just kids going to school. Teenagers going to school. It started as that, and from the constant threat, the violence, being pushed around, scared, intimidated, walked away. And when we walked away, there was nowhere to go to, so we were like on the streets, you know what I mean? And we weren't going to go back, and it just spiraled from there. They got like, petty crime, selling. What's that?
Go ahead.
No, it was just like I said, it was a downward spiral from there. It was alcohol abuse, drug abuse, petty crime, stealing, and just aimless. Became totally aimless with our lives, from that point on.
What about in your neighborhood? Was your neighborhood integrated, or were the kids at your school there because of busing or both?
Yeah, the neighborhood that was integrated, and the school was integrated by forced busing. So they would come from, so if you were in one city, then you got inner city, to make it equal. However, it was more than that. It was, they were predominantly a black school, from forced busing, you know what I mean? The neighborhood had some, but not as much as the school was. The neighborhood was a little bit of a safe haven, you know what I mean, where we could, go in the woods and, just be away from it all. That was a place that you could, not the neighborhood itself, but, the woods behind the neighborhood you could kind of go into and kind of escape, that kind of threat, if you will, Colin.
If you pull out an envelope and you do a little back of the envelope calculating, you calculate the number, you think about the number of kids in your school over a period of years that were the victims of this relentless black on white hostility and violence that people ignored and denied on a level that approaches criminal child abuse. If you take your school and you figure out the number of kids that happened in your school, you multiply that by the number of similar schools around the country, that's a pretty big number.
Yes.
I mean, that number's over 100,000 people.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, it is. Devastating. It has a devastating effect.
And to this day, I've never seen this acknowledged in a movie, never seen it acknowledged in TV or radio, in a newspaper story or anything. All I see is Chris Rock went to a Catholic school and kids like to play jokes on him.
Yeah. That's nothing compared to what we went through. I mean, that's what about the violence that we suffered? What about no one speaks of that. You know what I mean? It was like epidemic, you know what I mean? And it had great impact of our lives. You know what I mean? It wasn't just something small. It was something to where, I look back now that I'm older and I'm like, wow, like I really was giving up an education because of this violence. I was like giving up my future because I didn't want to be beat up anymore. Like I was there to learn. I was there to, just be a regular kid. And to look back and think, wow, like I dropped out because of this. I lost so many opportunities because of this. I had to struggle to get my life back online later down the road, and it took years to get my life on track. So how many years it was put into this bad situation just for simply going to a school that had predominantly black students? How much has that costed me and my friends? It costed us and some their lives. If they hadn't quit school and if they weren't getting beat up and intimidated, they would have carried on, went on living their lives, but that didn't happen. What happened is, we're so beat down and so afraid and intimidated and scared, you quit, and then you quit, and then there was nothing for, what are you going to do without a high school education? You weren't going to get a job. So you hang out, and then you become, you're drinking, and you just, their lives became total nightmare. And like I said, it took many, many years for the very few of us to get our lives back on track that made it. And some of my friends died. You know what I mean? They got on drugs, they were doing heroin, and they died. And I was going to their funerals, and I couldn't even believe it. And to this day, there's only a very few of us, like I said, 5 out of the group that actually made it. And we talk to this day. One of them became a restaurant owner. But between me and him, I mean, and maybe 3 others, that's it that actually made it out. We say, geez, we can't believe we made it out of all this alive, really. With the kind of bullying and stuff that we went through. But yeah, it definitely changed the course of our lives, for sure.
There are many, many tens of thousands of young white people in this country that will hear your story and say, hey, that happened to me. I didn't really know that happened to anybody else. Let me ask 2 more questions. One, what about the girls that you went to high school with, the white girls? What was their life like?
I think for them, the girls within my circle that left, I think they were more like, I don't think it was as much violence as it was towards us, as it more like a sexual harassment type of thing. They were very, grabbing on them and things of that nature. So more like a sexual harassment type of thing was going on with them. And that's why, the few that were in our group, left as well. Being groped in the hall, and it's very, very sexually aggressive towards them. And, like the ones that dropped out, they, same thing. They got into, there was nowhere to go, alcohol, and just, down the tubes because of that treatment. I definitely think it had a profound effect on their lives as well, to this day.
Let me ask you this. When you tell people what you went through in high school, do people have a hard time believing you?
I don't think when I tell them what happened to me in high school, surprisingly, some of them, not all of them, but some of them went through the same thing. But the older folks don't have a hard time believing that. They were like, it couldn't have been that bad, the people that were parents, it couldn't have been, really? Yeah, they're kind of shocked about it. But people in my age group and that generation that I came from, that were going to similar schools in different states that I know now, they suffered some of the stuff that I went through. So they believe it, but not everybody. I'd say 50-50.
When I talk to people like you, and there's another guy that's going to be on this podcast that tells identical story from Massachusetts. And I was talking to a cop yesterday on the phone, a New York cop, and everybody, sometimes a lot of people preface what they tell me by saying, Colin, you're probably not going to believe this, but, and I always say, hey man, stop. I actually know the opposite is true. I know you are telling me things that are actually 10 times worse than what you're saying it is.
Yeah, it is. It was. I didn't even get into the great detail, but talking about this actually is like bringing it all back.
I mean, it's not something people want to talk about. You feel embarrassed. You feel ashamed of it. You recall these humiliations. I mean, people just block it out. I grew up in a neighborhood with, I grew up in a neighborhood that I believe you might even be familiar with, that a lot of my friends went to public school. So for years, every day, I would hear these stories about kids with pepper spray, constant fights to and from school, in school, all along racial lines, lots of racial hostility. I experienced it myself outside of the Catholic school I went to. A lot of kids dropping out. Of the kids who dropped out, 3/4 of them lived exactly the way you described it. People living in the gray area, the fringe. They never got their lives back together. Lots of drugs, lots of alcohol, lots of petty crime, lots of promise unfulfilled. And I'm just astonished how much of this went on and how so many people are so capable of ignoring it, denying it, condoning it. I mean, it's epidemic, just the way you said.
Yeah, it's a shame, and we weren't able to have any, you couldn't have any pep rallies or anything like that. You couldn't have anything of, put on any sort of shows, for the teens at our school. That all got shut down because of the racial violence. There was police in our school. They actually had like a little. They had like almost like I wouldn't say a department, but they would have like an office there with like parole officers. And some of these kids were really violent that they had like a parole officer there that would visit them along with the counselors and stuff like that. So that's what we were dealing with, and we weren't used to dealing with that coming from the middle schools were rough, but not as rough. And when we came into that, it was a whole different world. You know what I mean? And it was something that we weren't used to.
When did you move out of that part of the country?
I moved away when I had kids, and I told myself there's no way that I'm letting my kids grow up and go through what I went through, and I don't even want them to see that side of life. So I chose to move, to the mountains. And I know it sounds, crazy, but more of I kind of moved to like a Bible Belt area, and
listen, I happen to spend some time right in the area where you're living now, and there's absolutely no racial tension there. There's no black mob violence. There's none of that. I personally have seen what that part of the world is like, and I keep an eye on the newspapers there. When you were growing, after you left high school, I'm guessing it sounds like there was like about a 10-year period there maybe where you stayed and where you grew up. Did you ever happen to see any of the black people that were creating such havoc in your life outside of that?
No, I can't say that I ran into those particular people again. No, I can't say I have. You know what I mean? Outside of going to school, I never ran into them again. However, I mean, you still had, you still run into it, you know what I mean? Whether it be a restaurant but obviously, getting older, you can deal with it a different way. You have a sense of maturity and you're bigger, you've grown up, you've become a man, and you know how to mentally deal with that or physically defend yourself. But when you're that young, you don't know who to go to, and you might not have someone to go to. Who can you go to? If your parents don't believe you, and you know what I mean, you don't know anything about, the police, or, you don't know where to turn to. You know what I mean? You're ashamed. It's not like it's something that you're proud of, that you got beat up, you got your ass beat, so you're going to go telling everybody, you're ashamed of it. So,
this is a violation on an extremely personal level.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, even talking about it's like bringing me back to that era that like obviously that you don't really want to talk about, you definitely feel uncomfortable talking about, because it's a dark time in your life that you don't want to relive,
Okay, I happen to know that you've gone through both of my books and you watch my channels. When you see this stuff on YouTube or in Don't Make the Black Kids Angry or White Girl Bleed a Lot or any of the articles I write for American Thinker or Front Page or wherever, does any of this stuff resonate with you?
It does resonate with me when I see that. It creates I can't describe it, but it definitely creates a fire within me. It enrages me. Like, I become enraged. It definitely hits. It hits home. It's not like I'm watching something that, I didn't know existed. I know it existed. Now I'm seeing it on a level that's like, it's like what I went through, but I'm watching other people go through. And so, yeah, it hits home for me. It definitely hits home, and it strikes a nerve. It strikes a chord, and I become enraged.
I always talk about two things. I talk about this black on white crime, black on white violence, black on white hostility, black mob violence, but on one hand. But on the other, I draw a lot of attention to people who ignore, deny, condone, excuse, encourage, and even lie about it. I think, does one or the other of those kind of get your attention more or get you more pissed off?
denying it denying it gets me. I can't find the word. I'm baffled, that people can go on and actually, act like it's not happening. I mean, I'm in shock. I don't know what word to describe it, but just being in shock. Yes, that it makes me more angry that what it is that everyone is whites are scared to death to be labeled racist. If you bring that word up, they're scared to death. They'll do anything. I mean, they'll literally do anything possible to not be labeled a racist. If that means denying it's not going on, if that means, whatever it takes, they'll do to not be labeled a racist, and definitely deny that what's really going on. And what's really going on is the opposite, it's the whites that are suffering this violence. But on TV, all you see is, it's twisted, reality is totally has been twisted.
But here's what I find, and we'll close the interview on this. I find that a lot of people like you are noticing this enormous disparity between their personal experience, their personal observations, and the fairy tales they read on TV or see in the newspaper. And I noticed a lot of people now, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or just in their own family, they're really kind of standing up and demanding some truth on this topic. That's what you're doing here. And you know what? I happen to know how unbelievably difficult it is for you to talk about this. But I'll also tell you this. You're talking about it. I'm absolutely convinced with all the people who listen to this podcast, I think you saved somebody's life today.
Man, that would be great if I could reach anybody, any young person or any parent that is unaware of what's going on when they send their kids to these schools, or, you know what I mean? When they're just sending them out there, like, be aware. And I hope they become aware that they might not always come to you and tell you, that they may be embarrassed. No young boy like myself. Listen, I remember getting beat up, and I got beat up by blacks leaving school. They took my book bag. They threw it up in a tree. It didn't come down. So I went home to my father, and my father, he noticed I didn't have my books, I swear. And he was yelling at me, where's your books? Where's your books? Well, he was a Marine, and I wanted to be that tough young man. And I was so embarrassed, and I didn't want my dad to think I was a bitch, or, you know what I mean? So I didn't tell him that I just got beat up and they threw my books up in a tree. So I lied and said, I lost them. And then I got beat by him. You know what I mean? So that's the kind of stuff that went on. And years later, he found out about it, and it really hurt him, to know that that was really what had happened. I told him when I was older, but, those are the kind of things that parents need to know. They might not always come to you and tell you what exactly is going on. But I remember that, to this day, and it was, I was ashamed that I got beat up. So parents may be blind to the fact that this is going on, but it is going on. And nowadays it's going on more than ever. It's at a rate it's undescribable. So I hope that anything I say can awaken someone, by going back to that period in my life. And I'm sure there's so many going through it right now.
When people go through an experience like that, when your parents send you off to school either out of ignorance or malice, when your parents send you off to a black school and you're a white kid, you're so concerned about the whole universe crashing in on you, you don't really have time to look up and look around and go, hey, is this happening anywhere else? I think that's what happened to these two guys. And until they started until they got out of high school and start learning a little more, and they looked around and they said, wow, that's not just happening to me, not just happening in this school, that's happening in schools all over the country. And all over the country, what happens when a teacher complains? Oh, it's the teacher's fault. What happens when the student complains? Oh, we'll ship him off to the psychiatric hospital and pump him full of psychoactive drugs. where he won't even notice if people are threatening to beat the hell out of him. So what do you think's if we go back to the beginning with that kid, what do you think's going to happen to that kid going to school, going from school? You don't think he's a target? What about in school? You don't think he's a target? You think he can go back to that school? Do you think that mom is going to be able to find another school where black kids are not picking on white kids? I'm just not cutting parents any slack on this. I'm sorry. And I'm starting to cut you and I a lot less slack as well, because we're not doing a good enough job in getting the message out to parents who are putting their kids into this dangerous situation. Maybe they don't know, or maybe they just kind of know and they need somebody to look them in the eye and go, that's a black school. They don't really treat white kids very well there. Right? Sometimes it takes just a little nudge to get people, to wake people up into the reality of what they're subjecting their kids to. A lot of people, if you live in a chocolate city or if you work in a workplace with lots of black people, you've already made your deal with the devil. That is, you're just going to try to ignore what's happening, or you're going to try to pretend something else entirely else is happening. That's what happens to all the white people who live in Wilmington, Delaware. They all decided that somehow we're all going to pretend this crime doesn't really exist that much, and we're going to pretend that when it happens, it's not really a black thing, because everybody knows white kids do the same thing too. And when it keeps happening over and over and over, and it's always, always, always a black person doing it, well, we're just going to crank up our level of denial, deceit, and delusion to match this increasing level of criminality. This morning on my little nextdoor.com neighborhood page, I got a note. Everybody gets these messages, right? It goes, well, the Wilmington police say that the incidence of people breaking into cars is ratcheting up. So they caution you to do this and do that. It's the equivalent of, don't walk around with earphones, because any white person that walks around with earphones, that's somehow an invitation for somebody to come and beat and rob him. But it's like, people already know that's happening. What we don't know is, why don't cops come catch the kids who roam the streets at night, 1, 2, 3 in the morning, going up and down the streets, just jiggling car doors, going into people's garages? That's a thing. That is a thing. And why when they catch them are they so eager to let them off? I've been there in these meetings where black people stand up and says, no, we don't want you to arrest him because we don't want that to go on his record. We don't want to criminalize that person. Yes, catching somebody breaking into a car, catching somebody breaking into a garage, that causes the person to have committed that crime. Yeah, you have to watch Star Trek to really be able to understand what I just said. You have to understand quantum physics and time travel. If you don't understand all that stuff, may I suggest you go see the movie Black Panther this weekend? I just learned I got to do a video. I'll put this in a pot. I should do it now, but I'll do it later. So one of our viewers just sent me an hour-long video of the opening of the Black Panther movie in Hollywood. I think it was the Chinese theater out there. And so they got this black actor. I guess he's one of the old dudes in the movie, but he's patiently explaining to these two interviewers how, man, it's really good to have this movie out, because it shows two things. It shows all the great things that are happening in Africa today, and it shows what Africa would have been like had not white people gone down there and ruined it. Yes, this is not a science fiction movie. This is a history movie. That's how bad it is. That's how crazy it is now. And a lot of times you and I, we can insulate ourselves from the world's craziness. If somebody's out there on the corner of your house, he's running around naked and shouting at the top of his lungs, well, we can either call the cops or we can draw our blinds and let the world take care of that. But now when we see in these schools, we see in these movies, they're institutionalizing black on white hostility. It's hard to keep running from that because it's seeping into so many things. Saw a big article this morning that's in the Philadelphia paper that said, white people are taking advantage of loan programs that were meant for black neighborhoods. That is a bad thing, apparently. I mean, I don't remember anybody in Congress going, hey, we need a new program for black people. They always kind of dress it up. But when you're doing the headlines, you're not allowed to do all the nuance that kind of hides what you're really doing. You're not allowed to really say, well, black people don't really like white people, so let's give them some free stuff in the home loan department, and maybe that will make them less hostile. Stefan Molyneux correctly pointed out on his Twitter stream this morning, oh yeah, that's one of the things that started the big real estate crisis of 2008, 2009, giving people mortgages that they in no way could afford. It was really, okay, this is going to go a little off the charts, but that happened, obviously happened. I mean, the Congress was telling banking regulators, listen, you're not giving enough loans to black people, you're not giving enough loans to Hispanics. Too many are getting rejected. We don't want to see those numbers. So they started, writing loans, more loans for black people and Hispanic people, relaxing the standards. Now, listen, in the world of risk management, I happen to know a little bit about this by accident. That doesn't really matter. I mean, you just charge more because the risk in the loan of being defaulted then will be just absorbed by the market, right? Because if you take here's the way. Okay, all right, this is probably too much, but I'm going to throw it at you anyway. So if you have good credit, right, and you go to your bank and you get a home loan, the bank's not going to, that's a piece of paper. Your home loan's a piece of paper. It's a guarantee from you that you're going to pay that. That's the value, right? That's the asset. It's this piece of paper that says you are going to pay that loan back. And we know what your credit is. We know what your score is. We know because of all these great mathematical tools we have, we know, given your financial situation, what the chances are of somebody like you defaulting on that loan. So if you have a good credit, boom, your mortgage rate's less. Some of the other things that are attached to a mortgage are less. And so the bank doesn't just sit on that paper. It bundles all these pieces of paper, thousands and tens of thousands, and it puts them all together, and they sell them. They sell your promise to pay to Wall Street, and people buy them. Now, what happened that really screwed the pooch back in 2008, 2009 was when the banks were bundling the loans, the people who were in charge of grading the loans, they took these loans that went to black people and to Hispanic people because the government regulator, the banking regulator said, you got to do that now. You better relax your standards. Well, they didn't really describe the loans properly. They didn't really let the investors know what the risk was. And so people are buying this paper at a certain, the bundle, they put all the paper together, they sell it on Wall Street, all these promises to pay. Some of the promises to pay were not good on the day they signed the paper. So all these loans crashed. And the reason everything got screwed up is because it's an unbelievably high risk instrument, high risk investment. But people bought it thinking it was a safe investment. And that's why a lot of things crashed, because nobody really knew the banking regulators were trying to hide how ridiculously risky these loans were. People will buy risky loans. I mean, but you buy them at a premium. So you build in the risk. So if 10% of your loans go under, you're still making money on the other 90% at a higher price that'll cover your 10%. That's how it works. But I used that example because I mean, this whole racial identity thing is just seeped into every aspect of our society now. Banking and schools and cops, everywhere. Sometimes you can ignore it, but increasingly we cannot. If you think you can ignore sending your kid to a black school, that's child abuse. Child abuse just as bad as letting your the black women who let their black boyfriends in the house and the boyfriend beats a child to death because he spilled some cereal. Oh yeah, that happened 2 weeks ago. And now the only answer is all of us have to start attending racial sensitivity classes. So when we see this stuff, we'll recognize we're just imagining it. It's not really happening. That's called gaslighting. That's how crazy it is. That's how urgent it is that we listen to these podcasts. We share them. You subscribe to this. You let your friends know what the hell's happening. Yeah, that's how urgent it is. Even if it does make a few black kids angry.